All right, well, our speaker today is Jason Pettrey from Exxon Mobile. He's a European analyst for their supply and transportation division in Fairfax, and he's going to tell us a bit about what Exxon Mobile is doing today, how they interact with the community, and so we're very happy to have him today, and hopefully we'll have him back after today. Jason?
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today. I've got about a 15-minute presentation lined up for this morning, and what I like to do afterwards is just have some question and answer, because I think that's a lot of the value of these type of events is we get out of our office building and actually get to interact with real people. So it's always a pleasure. Just a few things before we start. As Ashley mentioned, my name is Jason Pettrey, and I've been working with Exxon Mobile for 10 years now. So I just got the email this week that said, congratulations, you've survived 10 years. So I was like, wow, that went by very, very quickly. But I've worked in Houston for the bulk of my career. I actually started in our Baytown refinery, which is outside of Houston. It's Exxon Mobil's largest refinery, and it's actually the nation's largest refinery. They refine about 600,000 barrels of oil every day there, which is just a staggering amount. And worked there for about 8.5, 9 years, and then just transferred last summer up here to our Fairfax office. It's a headquarters office, and so there we're doing a lot of trading and buying of products, selling of products, and also do a lot of strategy development and things. My current role as a European analyst is just to monitor that area of the world. Obviously, if you've been paying attention to your news lately with events such as Libya and Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen, Bahrain, there's been a lot of things going on in that area of the world. So anyhow, we'll go ahead and get our presentation started up here. I may need to provide some assistance. It may have timed out and locked down again. Let's see if it locked out. Okay, let's try. They're fabulous and they're working. That's the type of opportunity. Thank you.
It did.
There we go. All right.
Great venue for it.
And you just use the right arrow key. Some of them have some animations, so this will make sense.
Sure.
It's fine. All right. All right, Ashley saved us here. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. So let's flip to the first page here. So just a bit about the global market of energy and Exxon Mobil. I wanted to give you all some background about how big this industry is. So just for scale, think about within the world, we use almost 90 million barrels of oil a day. Now the problem with barrels is no one talks about barrels anymore. It's kind of this old antiquated British terminology, and everyone's like, what is a barrel? Is it 31 gallons, 42 gallons, 55 gallons? So in our industry, a barrel is 42 gallons of oil. And so we're using 90 million every day of that. So just for scale, what that's equal to is, imagine if you put all of that oil in a box, and you put that box up in New York City. The size of that box would be as tall, almost as tall as the Empire State Building, as wide as the Empire State Building laying down, and as deep as the Empire State Building laying down. The world uses that every single day. So it's just staggering when you think about how much that is. So let's flip here to the next slide. A bit about Exxon Mobil's size. So a lot of times, we think, especially here in the United States, Exxon Mobil, largest publicly traded oil company, usually ranked up there in single digits as far as many metrics that are measured. But let's think about how big that actually is. Now, a trivia question for you guys, since I know you like trivia this morning. So, refining capacity. Think about oil refineries. How many oil refineries do you think Exxon Mobil has, and what % percent of the world is that? What do you think? Just give me some numbers. Half? What do you think?
500.
Yeah. What percent? You think it's probably half, 3/4 of the world's refining?
40%.
40%? All right, survey says, 7%. Okay, so what about, so that's refining. So maybe we don't have a lot of refineries, but surely oil, we must drill a ton of oil. We must just drill a ton of it. How much of the world's oil do you think that Exxon Mobile actually produces? 4%. 4%? 5? All right, survey said 3. So you can see OPEC there in red. They control about 40%. We produce about 3. And then based on that total global energy, I'll let Ashley present that. So ExxonMobil produces about 2% of the total energy needs. A lot of people find that staggering because they think it's such a big company in the U.S. Well, keep in mind, we are just another global player. You have many of these national oil companies. So you've got Saudi Aramco, Sinopec in China, Iran National Oil Company, Libya National Oil Company, Nigeria National Oil Company. All of these are private government-held entities, and they are really our competition, right? And they're also in different parts of the world that have different pay structures, different type of cost of labor and things. So you can see that sometimes, even though we perceive it quite large in the U.S., some of these oil majors are really now just the other size as some of the competition. So interesting food for thought. Let's flip over to the next page. Global energy supply and demand here. Now this is an interesting chart. We measure this in quadrillion BTUs. So that's a lot. So think about your gas grill that you've got on your patio. Probably puts out maybe 30,000, 40,000 BTU. Maybe you got a big one at Lowe's that maybe puts out 50,000 BTU. So you would have to multiply that by 1,000 to get millions of BTU, times 1,000 again to get billions, then trillions, then quadrillions. So that's the scale of the energy we're talking about, which is just staggering. What you see here are some 2005 numbers that talk about what the world uses for energy. You might be surprised about some of these. So you can see oil. People think, okay, oil, transportation industry, that's fine. Coal surprises a lot of people. But remember, a lot of that goes to power generation. You have gas. You also have biomass. And what we mean by biomass is things such as wood. In other areas of the world, they may burn peat or even animal matter for heat. For instance, sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of that is animal matter that's actually burned for home heating. Then you have nuclear, hydro, and then wind, solar, and biofuels. So Ashley, if you click the mouse here, this shows the growth that we expect here as we get up to 2030. You can see that oil, coal, gas, these are all still growing. Now you notice here in the lower side of the chart, areas like hydro, wind, solar, biofuels, those grew huge amounts. You remember the bar on the far right was barely even visible, and now it's grown 100 times as much, but it's still just a small portion there. So that's one of the things to think about. A lot of times the energy industry, some of the oil majors in the news, you'll hear about, are you investing in this? Are you investing in that? So one of the reasons we have our portfolio is we look more towards the left-hand side of that chart and say, even going out into the future, the majority, not all, but the majority of the fuels are still going to be based on these. And so that's where we're putting a lot of our resources. Not all, but a lot of our resources. And so the right-hand side here is where a lot of the growth industry is, and we continue to monitor and invest in that and see what that will look like in the future. All right, let's flip over one more slide, and you click through these two. These are just the energy growth and then efficiency, and we'll talk about those a bit more later. As far as economies go, this is a neat chart that talks about where energy will grow in the world. The left-hand side, this is a chart, so you can see the time axis is on the bottom, and then that quadrillion BTUs of energy is on the left-hand side. The US, Europe, what we call OECD, which is kind of a way to measure the capital intensity and economic status of that country, you can see both of those are fairly flat as we go out. So basically the oil that we're using today, the energy we're using today, even though we'll continue to grow population, continue to buy more things, use more things, a lot of that will be offset with efficiency. So we don't see a lot more growth. But then look on the right-hand chart. You see any familiar names there? China, India, Latin America.
these countries are growing very, very rapidly. You hear about that in the news a lot. China just increased their interest rate to try to keep some growth under control because they're growing so fast. So these areas are where the world, and thus the energy growth, is heading. So anyhow, those 3 slides just kind of cap off, when you think about the industry, the scale of it, where this is being used, and who is using these things. So let's flip ahead. Next few slides I have are just about Exxon Mobile in general, kind of who we are, what we do type of things. We have 3 divisions within our company. The first is upstream, the second is downstream, and the third is chemical. And we've got slides that just talk briefly about what each of those do. An interesting, funny story here, when I was putting together the slides about a week ago, I looked at this picture and there's 2 gentlemen over in the right, the smiling guy in the blue and then the guy behind him. I said, that sure looks a lot like Dave Sandell and Jose Castro. So I worked for Jose Castro when I was an intern as a teenager, and Dave Sandell, we used to play tennis in Beaumont, Texas together, and he would just whip me every single Wednesday. So I thought it was a fairly small world that he was actually in this slide. So let's go ahead and flip to the next one here. So upstream you can think of as finding the energy, getting the energy, and getting the first kind of development of that. So a lot of that are the seismic surveys, finding where these oil deposits are, creating the drilling platforms and development platforms. So, you remember late last year in the news was a lot about the Deepwater Horizon. That was the Transocean rig there that actually sank after that explosion. And if you actually looked at some of the pictures on that, did you ever see how huge that rig was? They would have the ships up next to it, and it just dwarfed it. Some of these structures cost hundreds of millions, if not billions, of dollars to build. And we have hundreds of them, the industry does, all over the world. They're one of those things that in America we often don't see because we're not sitting in a port where these things are built. But just the size and scale of some of these are absolutely massive. Some of them are cities where hundreds of people will actually live and work. They'll have movie theaters and bars like this on the floating platform because they'll have hundreds of people that actually live there 24 hours a day. It's amazing. So let's flip over to the downstream. Downstream is generally what we think of as refining. So refining and supply. The picture there on the left is actually a picture of Baytown, Texas. That's Pipestill 8. The units I used to run were right behind it in the picture, so I worked there for many years. But this is our network of the 35 refineries that we own, fuels marketing, and then the lubricants and specialties. I even noticed here in the room this morning we've got some Shell Racing, and it looks like a Gilmore Aviation oil poster on here. So I thought that was fairly interesting. So I'm gonna have to get one to make sure we maybe replace some of these. But it's very interesting. Industry is quite old, over 125 years in the making. But this is how we're delivering fuels to the customer, right? So if you think about the infrastructure, just think about that. Anywhere you go in North America, you can more or less drive around a corner and there is a way to get fuel to you. All types of fuel. Unleaded motor gasolines, heating oils, diesels. You go to airports and there's jet fuels. So this infrastructure, pipelines underground, truck racks, terminals, all this has evolved over decades and decades to be able to get these fuels and lubes to your corner. Last page, chemicals. So chemicals is an interesting area. A lot of the petroleum that we get, so let's say oil and gas from the ground, a lot of it goes for transportation, commercial use, industrial use. But a lot of it also goes into chemicals. Think about in your home and look around, how many things do you have made of plastic? I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. Everything they have is made out of plastic. The tables that you have probably have a laminate on them. The carpets that we're standing on today are made out of polymers. A lot of the fabrics that we have are completely synthetic. And you just start walking around your house and thinking about all the things that we get that are derivatives of oil and petro fuels. So truly amazing. A lot of the things we specialize in are some of the plastics. We also make the butyl rubber. That's one of the layers that go inside your automobile tires to keep them going. A lot of it also goes into medical grades, say pharmaceutical equipment. So if you go to the doctor to get a shot, you want to make sure that syringe has been sterilized properly, isn't going to crack. Medical implants and things that you have need to be very high grade. So a lot of that material comes out as well. So let's go to the last slides here. I wanted to talk a bit about efficiency, technology, and then kind of impacts we have in service to the community. Around efficiency, this is a big deal. Again, one of the perceptions that we're always challenged with is, an energy company, you guys could just always go get more energy, right? Well, the challenge there, and what I would stress to you is, we're one of the most concerned people about energy. For example, the Baytown refinery, where I worked for several years, the operating budget of that refinery is over $2 billion a year. Half of that budget, half, is energy. So when you talk about balancing your budgets and getting your budgets under control, what's the number one knob we have in refining? It's controlling energy. And so a lot of the ways we do that is putting in projects, keeping equipment up to date, putting in things that can harness the economics of that. And so some of the neat things we have coming out around hybrid cars, we develop a lot of the films that go in those batteries. So you talk about, a new Toyota Prius that's got a stack of batteries in it. We help develop those polymer films that make those batteries work. We also have some of the next generation lubricants. So you all are probably familiar with Mobil 1, one of our leading lubricants. You may see if you look on the shelves, there's some that they have are actually zero weight oils. And some of the newer vehicles have those because it's a lower friction motor oil and can actually save you a couple percent in resistance and friction inside your engine, which results in better mileage. And the last thing we use is what's called cogeneration. Many power plants today don't even have this technology, but we've been using it in refineries for years. It's a way to capture the energy. So we actually generate our own energy inside a lot of plants and actually export it outside. And so we'll have large gas turbines. Think of it like a Boeing engine that is generating electricity spinning. Now, has anyone stood behind an aircraft jet ever before? No, not real close, right, because you're still with us. So it's very hot. So we actually, in a cogen, you take that energy that comes off the jet engine and you hook a big tea kettle up to it and you make steam. And so by doing that, you're actually able to capture all the energy, both rotary engines energy to make electricity and heat energy to make steam. And when you put those two together, it's quite efficient and saves a lot of energy. So that's another way that we save energy within our facilities. Supply-wise, some neat technology here. Directional drilling. Would you believe it if I told you we could drill a hole in the ground here and we could go 7 miles horizontal in any direction? We have that technology. It's truly amazing. So a lot of the ways, in the past where you look at the old photos of, Pennsylvania in the 1880s or whatnot, and there's just these wooden derricks every 20 feet, as people are drilling for oil, those days are gone. You can have one facility tucked off in one area, and it can hit a 100 square mile area and get any reserves that you need. So it leaves a clean footprint, minimizes emissions, and you're able to get to those resources. Other things that we have, the algae biofuels program, really neat. A supervisor that I worked with in Baytown, he actually was just assigned to this project, and we have a pilot plant at that refinery where we're putting together a field to actually grow algae, and these algae will actually convert material into diesel-type fuels. So it's not a biofuel, it's not an ethanol, but actually use the algae to make the final product, and so we're testing that out. Again, back to the graph we talked about earlier of some of those different forms of energy, we're trying to find ways of things that may make those economic that we can use. And the last slide that we've got here, talk about community service. I couldn't resist putting in the top photo. This was 2 weeks ago or so over at Luther Jackson Middle School. We had a fun raft rally there where we were teaching some middle schoolers some engineering principles there. So they actually emailed me the other week and they said, we put a photo of you on our webpage, so I couldn't resist putting it in this package here. So other areas that we work on, the Exxon Mobile Foundation and our math and science education, can't stress these enough. Employees give last year over $200 million of their own money towards the Exxon Mobile Foundation. So this goes anything from matching grants towards colleges and universities, math and science initiatives. With the Masters coming up, we've actually partnered up with Bill Mickelson, golfer, and he has a teacher's academy where every year by invitation, we pay for teachers to come and get themselves trained and equipped better to teach tomorrow's technology topics. Because as we're all aware, what we call the STEM area, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics, U.S. is lacking in this area. We are behind the 8 ball. We've heard that from the president and everyone on down. We've got to find ways to get better. And so we're supporting those type of initiatives. And with that, we've got a $125 million grant towards national math and science. So we're putting a lot of effort towards this because it's our company's future as well as, our country's future of being invested in these technologies. So with that kind of wraps up my 15 or so minutes that I wanted to spend with you. What questions do you have for me? Again, like to keep it very interactive.
Sure.
Quick question with the Exxon LEs and the step down in the Gulf. What type of stuff does Exxon Mobile do to mitigate that you have to mitigate if you have, whether it be a spill on land or in the ocean like that?
Good question. So, the question was, with some of these recent events, what do we as Exxon Mobil do, and how are we working that? Well, after the tragedy that happened there in the Gulf from some of our competition, we actually stepped up and sponsored. We said, you know what, as a leading technology expert in this area, we're going to sponsor a deep sea, basically, support and rescue type organization. And we have developed a subsea container system and things that would be able to be deployed. There were some publications about that I can get out to you all. Some interesting reads about how we developed that technology in partnership with a lot of our competition in the industry. And we were kind of spearheading that so that in the future, heaven forbid something like that happen, we'll be quicker able to respond, minimize environmental impact. And, I would always hate for it to be used, but it does make me proud as an employee to say, hey, we've learned from someone else's incident, and we've come up with a way to better protect the whole industry as a result of it. Other questions? Yes?
We often think because of all the plastics that is a huge part of the actual total petroleum production. It's not really, is it?
No, it's just a few percent. You're exactly right.
It's amazing that it's that little, but it's so pervasive.
You see it everywhere as the end product. So it's amazing that in one point it's so small, but you see it everywhere, and it's also amazing to think about, well, what are we doing with the rest of it? It's fuels. So it's just amazing to think about how much of that goes into fuels. Very good point. Yes?
Given what we hear are record profits, why is it the gas keeps going up at the pump?
Great question. So as the European analyst, I'm asked this every day. so there's a slide, actually, when we were chatting earlier this morning, I actually pulled up another slide I want to show you afterwards. But long story short there is, when you look at oil and gas industry earnings, so you hear about these massive, massive numbers, so many billions of dollars by this competitor, that competitor, whatever it is. One thing to keep in mind, the return on investment in oil companies such as Exxon Mobil, less than 10%. So when you sit back and think about the math of that, we're spending trillions to make billions. And of course, the end number seems so large, but think of it yourself. If you had a small business and you said, hey, I'm making lemonade, and it cost me 80 cents to make all the ingredients, you're probably going to sell it for at least $1, right? You're probably going to try and get 20% or so return. This industry is so efficient and advanced that companies such as ourselves can survive and be profitable with margins that are single-digit type margins. For comparison, other industries, pharmaceuticals, electrical components, even the beverage and tobacco industry, these are double-digit margins. I won't name companies, but you'll have 30, 40, 50% margins of markup on some of these products. So it's very amazing when you think about a barrel of oil can come, say 1 gallon of oil can come from Saudi Arabia, it's shipped and then ends up in your corner as refined product, and really only about a quarter to 50 cents of it was all the cost of manufacturing. Over 80% of it is just the cost of the raw material itself. There aren't a lot of products, think of the coffee you go buy from an unnamed green store with an awning on the corner. Do you think it costs $3.50 to make that bean? I don't know, but it's just food for thought. But a lot of it, back to your question of what drives this oil price, the price of Brent crude, which is kind of the European and almost a global benchmark, yesterday was $120 a barrel. When you do the math on it, 42 gallons in a barrel, you're talking close to $3 just for the price of the raw material, and you haven't even shipped it or refined it or transported it or marketed it or anything. So it's really, really amazing. And a lot of that is just around supply and demand fundamentals. You had Libya used to export 1.3 million barrels a day, zero. They've shut down. They're off the market. Japan, they had this huge earthquake, knocked out close to 1 million barrels a day of refining capacity. Now as they rebuild, there's going to be more demand. They have to get those nuclear reactors up. But meanwhile, they have to use oil-powered plants to supplement that electricity. So there's going to be more demand. With a lot of the unrest in the Middle East, that's leading to uncertainty in the market. So you have a lot of these geopolitical events that are leading to a lot of concern about what supply and demand could look like. Question?
That kind of segues into a question I have, which is my understanding is there's different refining requirements imposed by different states and regional groups of states. So to what degree does that affect supply and demand and hinder the creation of a single market? And in your position looking at the European market, to what degree is the European market more or less standardized than the U.S. market?
Great question. Really great question. And so the question is about, sometimes you'll hear what we refer to it in the U.S. as a boutique fuels market. Every state or every city you go to has their own blend. California has their own, you have to have California emissions if you drive that off of Price is Right and win the Corvette, right? It's got to have a special, thing for it. If you go to Boston or Washington, D.C., it's a different fuel spec than if you're in Tulsa. So all types of cities and countries in Europe and different states have these requirements. So I think in the U.S., the last time I saw one of these colorful maps that showed all the regions, 20 plus different types of fuel. So you're exactly right. That impacts something. Again, let's go back to our analogy of the lemonade stand. You're trying to sell lemonade, right? But you've got 100 million customers, but they want 30 different types. So you've got to have super lemonade, you've got to have limeade, you've got to have pink lemonade, and you've got to have 17 other types of lemonade. That's hard for you to manage. You have to build tanks for each of these. You have to have distribution networks to supply the pink lemonade and the regular lemonade. So it does add and drive some cost into the equation, there's no doubt. In Europe, there is a lot of standardization on some products, but don't get me wrong, when you have that many countries combined in one area, there also are a lot of regional specifics, different specifications that go on. So I'd say that the Europe market is almost just as challenging as the U.S. market in that it's a combination of states. We're one country in the U.S. where Europe is individual countries, but you can almost think of them as states in the Union. They all do have different rules. Yes, sir. I missed you. I'm sorry. Your question.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, I'm an oil baby. My dad worked for Chevron in the upstream side
Oh, cool.
years after World War II. But my question to you is, how do we get Exxon engaged in what we do as a Rotary Club here? We're partnering with Gunston Middle School, where we just set up an Interact Club. We do some international work in Suriname and other places. So how do we get you to be a corporate sponsor for our Rotary Club?
Great question. So what I would say there is let's talk more after this meeting, and let's also engage Jamie Meyer, who's our Speakers Coalition member, and say, hey, we have an organization here that wants to be involved, is involved in the community. How can these two organizations hook up and find some synergies back and forth? I think that's a great idea. No problem. Yes.
Okay, last question.
We
please.
got to be on
No
a
problem.
tour of Rotterdam Harbor.
Oh, excellent.
And when I was seeing the oil rigs, the slide is like this big. But when you're there in this little tour boat and you come up to where they are constructing these oil rigs, they are massive and they are towering. And I think they were mini-size compared to what you were showing. And I think that's an analogy to hearing things like billions and seeing the graphs.
Right.
And there's nothing like being there.
In the U.S., we just
how do
don't
you
see
convey
it. Right.
How do you convey it?
Like you said, we don't have a giant port next to the Pentagon where we're building this massive structure so that every day when you drive in, you go, holy cow, what are they building? This thing must cost billions of dollars. Well, it does. But we often just don't get the chance. We have coasts on certain regions. A lot of these things are made globally from different parts of the world. But it's an excellent point is, that's one of the things I like to stress in these type of sessions is think about the scale of this industry and how efficient it is to get something from one place to the other. If you go to the post office today and you mail something that weighs about 8 pounds, about the weight of 1 gallon of oil, and you say, I want to ship this from the U.S. to Saudi Arabia, it's probably going to cost you $30 or $40 to get that there. We can do that on a giant VLCC tanker for pennies on the dollar, maybe $1, to get a whole barrel, 42 gallons there, much less just 1 gallon shipped. So think about the efficiency of it all. It's truly, truly amazing. So, well, let me honor your time commitment today. Thank you so much for having me today. I'll gladly stick around. Any other questions you have, I'm happy to be at your disposal. So, thank you.
We present our guests with our
Coveted.
Crystal City Pentagon cups.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for being here with
Appreciate
us.
it.
Okay.